Welcome to Talk Design Podcast, the space where creativity meets conversation. I'm Adrian Ramsey, your host, and as someone deeply entrenched in the world of design, I'm thrilled to introduce you to the minds that inspire me in the hope that they will spark something special within you too. From a design past crafting women's swimwear to pushing the boundaries of performance sportswear, from mountaineering to international yachting, to implementing systematic innovation solutions that transcend boundaries in aerospace industry. My heart remains rooted in architecture, and exploring the emotional tapestry woven by built spaces is my fascination. My journey in design has been what can only be described as a life of design. I want to thank you for lending me your ears. I'm eager to embark on this next episode together. My guest on Talk Design today is Kevin Wolfe. Now, Kevin Wolfe is an architect from New York City, and Kevin and I have known each other, I reckon, for a couple of years, maybe a year or so, a couple of years.
Yeah, a little longer.
Yeah, through AMI, Architects Marketing Institute, who is how we met. And we have this pleasure of meeting most, for Kevin, Tuesdays, me for Wednesdays, online, and discussing business and discussing the business of architecture, marketing of architecture. And through that, we've been in many, many discussions, of course. And I said to Kevin, I'd love you to join me on Talk Design and join all our listeners and share from that what he does in New York, because he works a lot with historic homes or landmark homes. And he's got new build that he's just doing. Just really interesting to see what he's doing with architecture and with some of the constraints he has to work with, especially with the landmark stuff. So Kevin, welcome to Talk Design.
Well, thank you, Adrian. It's great to be here. I'm very excited to be on my very first podcast, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. That's fun. It's interesting. Yesterday, I recorded a podcast. It was my first in the room one with somebody sitting on two couches that I had recorded in person like that. I've been on other ones where I've been recorded in person, but it was my first one where I was the host, and it was like 270 podcasts in or something, but that was number one for me. So we're both fresh at something. I'd like to kick off with what's the Kevin Wolfe story? Where did this kid come from? Where did he go to school? What kind of trouble did he cause as a youngster? And then how did he even know what the word architecture was?
It's a good question, Adrian. So I am from New York City, specifically Queens, one of the boroughs. There are 5 boroughs that make up the city. I grew up in a family where I was the youngest. I have an older brother. My dad was a New York City cop. He ended up being deputy inspector and led the narcotics division. He had 400 detectives working for him. So we lived in a very quiet place that a lot of stuff was going on all the time in the days before cell phones. So that's kind of the background of family. And my father is from Brooklyn originally, and he went to a school called Brooklyn Technical School. And I followed in his footsteps. It was about an hour commute, and they had an architecture program. However, I did not enroll in the architecture program. They guided me toward college to be an English major, which is what I did. So I saw all these guys drafting. It was all boys. When I went, it just went co-ed the year I left. And there were 5,000 boys, and a bunch of them were doing architecture and things were engineering, things like that the school taught high school level. Anyhow, I went to school in New England. I went to Jesuit college, was a lit major. And when I graduated, I thought surely I would be a writer of plays, magazine articles. I didn't quite know what. And one of my dad's detectives said to me one day, who ended up being a family friend, he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, and he said, "Write plays. How are you going to make money at that? You should be a newspaper reporter." And he had been one. So he hooked me up with an interview, and I ended up getting a summer internship in New England and Connecticut. And then I ended up doing 7 years as a daily newspaper reporter in New England. And my final stop was Dallas, Texas.
Oh,
I
wow.
I did entertainment, I did theater, I covered City Hall, I did in this is in Massachusetts. And by the time I got to Dallas, I had covered City Hall in a place called Worcester, Mass, the second largest city. And at that point in time, there were a lot of architects that came in, did presentations that I covered of how they were going to reimagine this dead industrial city. And I decided one day, I don't want to be writing about them saying this. I want to be doing what they're saying. So I got this great job in Dallas. It was the hottest place you could be at the moment, according to Time magazine. You know, it was a happening city. I went down there, had the best job you could have being a feature writer, interviewing people. And after a year of being there, I decided, I want to go to architecture school. So I came back. I actually got 2 degrees. I got one in landscape architecture at one school, and I got another in architecture. And at Columbia was where I got my master's in architecture. And I worked for some of the biggest firms in the city, Raphael Vignoli, Cohn Pedersen Fox. I worked for the New York City Parks Department. And then I went off on my own and decided I really wanted to be a residential architect
Mhm.
doing landscape and house. And that's what I've ended up doing for the last 27 years is when I left and opened my own firm. And here I am, Adrian, all these years later. So
That's
everything great fun. I love newspapers. It was one of the best times of my life. And it weirdly, what I learned in as being a journalist, and I had no training in journalism, was how to interview people,
Mhm.
how to listen to what they're saying. There really are a lot of skills that you wouldn't think are transferable, but they really are. And writing, being able to write doesn't hurt either.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
how I got to here.
Well, amazing journey. And I really love the part, where somebody asks you, how are you gonna make money out of that? Or what are you gonna do with that? And
Yes,
I nobody probably asked you that when you chose to do architecture, but many architects ask themselves that question after a few years in practice,
absolutely.
because it's also highly dynamic. And probably, being a playwright, obviously the storytelling of being a playwright is something fascinating, like absolutely incredible. And I've got a client here who is his father is Australia's most famous playwright.
Wow.
And yeah, and so it's interesting, like he obviously makes a good living out of being a playwright, but he'd be one of very, very few. And then there's probably
Exactly.
a very big gap before anybody makes a
Yeah.
living at all. It's so that part of it, but America's got a massive arts, like background, and especially on the East Coast. And I say that's probably a bit unfair saying especially on the East Coast. I actually think in America everywhere has, in all your major cities and stuff, there's good arts funding and there's good things that happen with the arts. And the same happens with public architecture in America. There is maybe it's a competition between the states almost, who can have what or who can do this part better than that. I notice that when I travel around there a lot. And then so that part of the arts and then that part of the visual arts where it's the plays and the theatre and that. It's interesting when you look at like where life is right now. And if we went back 20 years, really, probably something around that, who would have thought that newsprint would have been so disrupted?
Yes.
Out of its disruption, we have podcasting, we have like social media short form, stuff as well. Everybody is looking for a new place to tell their stories or the stories of their clients or the stories of what their life is or what interests them. And so it's the storytelling hasn't changed. It's just the delivery's changed.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with you, Adrian. It's interesting. Many of the people that I started in journalism with, they thought I was nuts when I left to do
Architecture.
architecture. I'd already won an award for my writing and things like that. But what happened is as newspapers morphed into something else, none of those people ended up that I was close with at least ended up continuing careers in journalism. They ended up being, teachers, they ended up being editors, of course, which is different from
Hmm.
reporting. I was not interested in that. But as you say, it's all about storytelling, and architecture is also about storytelling. Every house has a story. Every family you meet, couple who's starting out, whatever it is, there's stories there. And our role as designers is to pull that story out, get to the heart of it, and in some way, satisfy whatever the program is within the means that they have
Yeah.
available to design a new house, to renovate an old house, whatever it happens to be. And for me, the storytelling is what's so much fun. I think, it goes all the way back to wanting to write, wanting to be a playwright,
Mhm.
tell stories. It's just a different format. And I love that you've taken your design world and translated it into a podcast and tell that story, tell stories that way and other people's stories. It's really interesting.
It's fascinating, doing it. It's absolutely, I am so grateful for the opportunity to do it. And the people that I get to talk to that otherwise they wouldn't have a reason to talk to me. It would be they'd be doing it out of I suppose, the kindness of their heart, and they're still doing that. What it is, though, is that there is them getting to share their story, and otherwise there wouldn't be that impetus. And like I often say, look, out of all our listeners, if I'm the only one who listened, don't worry, I get what I'm here for, which is the story that I want to hear. And it's so beautiful to be able to get those stories and then share those stories as well, and then other people grow from those stories and they get to understand who you are, what your process is, and what makes you a human, what makes it tick. And I think it's, yeah, very, very fascinating. The other point that you made from coming from that reporting background is the ability to listen and pick on the nuances of conversation.
Yes.
It hones that skill. And when you're doing it, I imagine I'm going to get you to explain it to me, but when I'm doing it, I'm using that when I'm talking to my prospective clients, to my clients. It's the nuances that are going to bring the thing to magic as opposed to the broad things. You say to somebody, what would you like in your house? And they tell you, 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, and a kitchen. And we kind of go, well,
Yep.
we hear a lot of that. What about your house?
Right. No, you're
And
exactly right. And I think one of the skills is asking, as an architect, as a designer, is asking open-ended questions, which you have to do as a reporter too. If you say, "Do you like this?" and they go, "No,"
no.
that doesn't tell you anything. So you have to, figure out ways, and sometimes you have to ask the question
Hmm.
over and over again, but in a different
Mhm.
format. You're not saying, "Well, you didn't answer that." You have to say it in a different way that pulls out what it is that maybe they haven't thought about it enough to get at what you're trying to ask.
I,
They don't know
I,
how to think about it, to think about design. Design is, it's not most people's worlds at all. It's very esoteric for people and abstract. They might say, "Oh, that's beautiful," but they have no idea why, about proportion, color, light, how something hits it, lights it up, what makes a room beautiful to be in, live in. But you have to get that thread and kind of gently pull it out of them to find out where they really want to go.
yeah, what matters to them. And I had a friend who had a very high-end audio company where they would do installs. He ended up making very high-end audio equipment for the global
Hmm.
market. But he started out with doing installs of other audio equipment. And he used to test his clients as to what level they could hear to. So all his clients were wealthy. That wasn't the question. They were wealthy. They had to be to afford the install stuff that he was doing and the kind of equipment. But he would be testing to see at what level they could hear what parts of music, because they may have hearing damage or whatever it is, just not even an ear to be able to separate things. And they get to a point where their spending could finish here with what they can actually physically hear, and then they would be spending out to here. Now, he would originally, it was this thing, so it's kind of crazy. And I go, until your friend comes around who can hear out to here.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really great example, actually.
It's similar to what we do, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I was thinking exactly that. It's people have different gradations of, the audio files, for lack of a better word, are really into every little subtlety. Someone else is just like, oh, that's good. It's sound. It's in the room I want to be in. That's fine.
Yeah.
And that's all they need.
Yeah. And the
different
same
strokes of.
Yeah, the nuances of it are fascinating, like really, really fascinating. So you set up, first of all, like you went and worked for big companies, which is obviously an amazing grounding. In doing that, were you doing more public projects? Were you working more on, like civic projects, or were you working on single residential family homes? What was that like?
Yeah, so a variety of things. My first job out of Columbia, and I was in a class of 60, and 8 of us got hired by Raphael Vignoli, he recently died, world famous. He's done stuff all over the world, including New York. But weirdly, I ended up there working on a single family house for a very wealthy woman in East Hampton on the ocean. And she wanted a 6,000 square foot, 1 bedroom house. Let's say she was a little eccentric. She didn't want anyone staying with her, including her family. So that was an interesting experience. I graduated right as the world economy crashed in 1988.
Okay.
And so I did a year there, a year at Cohn Pedersen Fox. And I worked on another place called Fox and Fowle, which was a big firm, which is at Fowle today. And so I worked on a variety of buildings. One was a civic building. Another was, skyscraper stuff in Manhattan. But in these huge offices, which, this architect's office, if it's 50 or 60 people, that's considered huge in, in the world of architecture. So we would work in teams. There'd be like 6 of us in a U-shaped cubicle, all working, 2 facing each other with a lead architect. And you would just be doing various things. And, it's kind of like, it was a weird analogy to how I started in architecture. They'd send you to the boondocks, some little town where you were the sole reporter and you had to collect information and, do a story and send it back. And these teams were kind of similar to being in the boondocks, except you were working with a lot of people, but you weren't, you were just a cog in the wheel. Right. And that's okay if you want to do that. But I had no interest in skyscrapers. I never did. There were classmates of mine that's all they wanted to do. And they ended up doing that and going all over the world doing that. And I think in part because of the place I grew up in New York, I was really interested in how people live in houses. And working for these big firms was just, a great introduction to big city architecture in Manhattan. And I loved it. I lived in Manhattan and did everything that a young person can do in Manhattan for those years. And it was, and survived on very little, quite honestly, because the pay was not the attraction. But yeah, I love the detail of a house. I love the direct interaction. And I love that I'm the guy that gets to do that, whether it's working with other people on it or myself alone. It really depends.
So then with that, because I'm hearing you, like there is that thing with, like doing skyscrapers and stuff. And, I've got a few architectural friends who do that. That's what they do. They do skyscrapers. And they're fascinating, their journey as well. And then you look at the single family home thing, which is kind of, I relate to that because that's what I do as well. So it's very feels very relative. One of the things that I find fascinating with it is the energy that you put into a single family home is emotionally like, I don't know, 70% of all the energy you can use. And then the 30% goes into the design, because the 70% is about the land, the people, the situation, the relationships, and all those pieces. And the 30% is about what the product becomes out of all those pieces. Well, this is in my experience. How do you find that? And do you have an interest in designing homes that what we'd call spec homes, a house that's designed for maybe somebody to buy someday? Or, it's you're going to get finished, the builder's going to finish it, and it's going to be sold. We don't know the client. We do know the client because it's the builder or the developer, but we don't know the client for the house.
Yeah, so in New York City, the suburbs, these are what we call McMansions.
Mhm.
So in the area I live in, which outside of the historic district, they're tearing houses down 100 years old left and right on small lots. And these are the most characterless, soulless, basely designed houses ever known to man.
You've
And they
got
don't
good
really,
things to say about them, clearly.
yes, I do. And they don't really employ, I mean, they have to employ an engineer at the very least to sign off on the plans, but they just repeat them over and over again. And they're just big, hulking brick monsters on tiny little lots that are like 20 meters by 30 meters tops. And they just max it out to what the envelope is.
Yep.
Huge double high hallway so that you're knocked out by that. And it's all sheetrock and little moldings. So I have no interest in that. They have no interest in me. Never the twain shall meet. It's very rare. There are some, I'm not going to dismiss all the developers, but there are some, more enlightened developers out on the island. You mentioned the Hamptons when we first started talking. There are developers who do stuff that they actually do employ architects who kind of know the market and do something beautiful. But not where I am in New York City in the quasi-suburban / urban market to do that ever. The developers here, they're not interested in. But it was interesting what you were talking about before, your friends that work for large firms. You brought me back to, I had my office in Manhattan when I first opened my office right next to Lord and Taylor on 38th Street. So right off of Fifth Avenue.
Yep.
And down the street while I was there, a 40-story skyscraper was being built.
Mm-hmm.
And that took exactly a year to complete. And that's how long it took for me to do a renovation of a single family house, and still does. So you could build in New York City a 40-story skyscraper of apartments and some retail on the bottom in the same amount of time that it takes to complete a single family house.
So I was going to go, is that built of inefficiency or efficiency?
I think I tell people this all the time. I think it's a comparison of buying a car, that's manufactured and it's, relatively easy to do. And when you commission someone, an architect, a designer, to help you make a house or renovate a house, it's one of the last things in the world that's handmade. I mean, truly handmade. Not that the skyscraper isn't made by hands, but it's at a different level, Adrian.
Yeah, it's a one-to-many product.
Yeah, and there's a lot of time spent, even though you're doing the construction or the renovation of a single family house. I mean, they push as hard as they can, certainly if you have a great team, but they have to stop for inspections. Skyscraper weirdly goes much faster.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. It's hard to explain to people. And when you tell them that, they're like, really? How could that be? 40 stories, the same amount of time as you spend on a house, but that's it.
I'd suggest that you might spend a year in planning a house with people, and the skyscraper might have taken 4 or 5 years to get there. So people don't realize that, the day they start digging the hole or demolishing the old building to dig the hole, the day that starts is the fastest part of the entire process that you're seeing. because the other part has been in planning consent, ticking
Yep.
boxes, getting finance, putting together all the right people. It's the part that people don't see. And the same, not obviously the same amount of volume of work, but the same thing happens for the single family home, but it's condensed down to a year of working instead of say 4 or 5 when you're trying to build a skyscraper.
Yeah, it's that's exactly what I was going to say, because working in those big offices showed me that. And part of the reason that not that I ever had this affection to skyscrapers, but I was like, do I really want to spend 6 years of my life working on one building?
Mm-hmm.
No, but there are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of people that do and take
Mm-hmm.
great joy in that, and I give them credit for that. But I realized that was not for me. Yeah,
So
but you're so right. 4 years.
you said before that you've been in your own practice for 27 years, did
7.
you say?
Yeah,
27 years. So if it had taken you 6 years each, you would have got through not even 5 projects yet. You'd be still
right.
stuck in the in the fifth project. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Five sixes is 30. Yeah. So you'd have been still stuck in the last project about halfway through. Um,
exactly.
it's pretty incredible when you kind of do those metrics, isn't it? And you would have
Yeah,
also been a small part of a bigger thing as opposed to
exactly.
a
Yeah.
big
I mean,
part of a smaller thing.
there are other rewards certainly
Yeah.
in doing big projects that people want to do that for that reason. I understand that. It's
Mm.
just not. Yeah.
It's just not your jam.
No.
The other part about the creation of, McMansions or spec homes,
Yeah.
it's something that I find pretty fascinating. Every now and then I will end up doing this, but for not somebody who's going to build masses of them, they'll be doing a single house. And
Hmm.
I don't do it for anybody who hasn't been my client on their own home.
Oh,
So
interesting.
if they go, oh, we're going to do a development property, would you do it for us? I'll go, yeah. Well, I'll have a look first, but yeah, absolutely. I know they're a good client. I know what they're like.
Yeah.
And we can build something that's a spec home. When I say spec home, it's like on spec of being sold. I find that a method that I use is I create an avatar. I don't do it. I get my client to create an avatar of their perfect customer.
Uh,
So just like we go, who's our perfect client? I get them to create a perfect client who's going to buy the home. In creating, these spec homes, one of the things that as I said, I do sometimes for clients who have done their own home and now they're saying, oh, we want to do one as a development for somebody else. And I go, how do we create an avatar with them together? So we create an avatar, and the avatar is who's going to buy the home. So how
right.
many kids are they going to have? What are they going to do for a living? What are all these different things? So and then what we do is we design to that avatar, and with it, the avatar, the other people that are involved in it is the real estate agents. So we go,
Right.
what's the most people are asking for? What are they prepared to spend? Where are they coming from? What's the
Mm,
stories that we're going to make this home tell, as well as a story of its own place and space where it is here? And
right.
I find it really interesting. Going back to your reporting days, this ability to unearth a story. How do you use that with a client? And if you had to create an avatar, what would you do?
That's really what. First of all, I love the avatar idea. I will just sidetrack a moment and say, as you were talking about this, the avatar, I could see that working in the Hamptons, for example, because they're typically second homes, obviously, probably very similar to the clientele that your Gold Coast, Sun Coast
Yeah.
attracts, although you're more like California, obviously. But, in the Hamptons, you're going to get the young family that wants it to be a multi-generational home where they bring friends and family. You might get the older couple, the kids are out and they see it as a place for their family to congregate, or you get it as the retreat where they want to come there, go to the beach, get away from New York City and all that entails. So that's a slice that I think good realtors good builders that do high-end stuff are going to be very tuned into that. They're sophisticated, whatever. In the area I live in, for example, the avatar is tougher, perhaps. And I know lots of realtors. Some are quite sophisticated. All of a sudden, we're getting realtors who are young guys that went to college, not to diss any of the ladies who lunch who decided to do a second career, but that typically was who would end up doing real estate. And they often knew nothing about the houses they're selling, all houses that are built, obviously. It's kind of different, but it's morphing, it's changing. And as you know, my reporter skills come into play when I'm meeting with somebody. I would say I do a lot of listening and let them do the talking, first of all. I'm not the star of the show to tell them what I do. They're the star of the show to tell me what they want and how they want it. And so it's like having a conversation. You want to build this rapport. Obviously, all of us want to build a rapport with the client and let it rip, let them feel comfortable enough to say whatever goofy thing they may think is goofy, let them say that and think that's okay. And I always tell people actually when I meet them, if we're doing, I'm talking about the walkthrough of the house. We've gotten to the point where they say, come and meet me at the house that I just bought, or we've lived here a few years and we can't stand it anymore, whatever the scenario is. And so I tell them at some point in the conversation, tell me everything you dream of, even if you think it's unattainable and silly. Just tell me what it is, because you never know where you could actually achieve that. And the funny thing is, when you're working on something, when I'm on my drawing board, sketching, thinking about stuff, that little thing that someone said, it's like, oh, Sarah said she wanted blah, blah, blah. I could actually do that, and it's not going to blow apart the budget that they've established and things like that. And that's why I always tell people to do that, because some people are embarrassed to say what they want. They
Yeah.
think it's silly, or worse of all, they just think they can't afford it. And
Yeah.
part of our role in the beginning, at least, some of the stuff that we've learned from AMI is giving an analysis in the beginning before any real design happens of how much is this going to cost roughly,
Yeah.
so that the priorities can come to the surface. What do they really want? The couples that one says this, one says that, they look at each other, stuff like that. You really want that, Jack? Really?
Yeah.
Things like that. They go away or they come to the forefront as, yeah, I really do want that. That's what makes it for me. So you want that to come out. And in the very beginning, that first walkthrough, I hope to hear as much as possible of what they want and that they feel comfortable enough to talk about that. But, that takes some work. But as a newspaper reporter, you don't get a second chance at interviewing somebody typically. You might be able to call them back and say, I'm looking at my notes. I'm not really clear about that. You just explain that a little bit more. And then your deadline is, midnight for a daily reporter for the morning paper. It's dead midnight. We have a little more time,
Yeah.
but that kind of training, on the job training, I'll call it, as a reporter, you get one shot really in a phone call, and that's it, to get everything you need to extract. You do a lot of research beforehand. That's
Mhm.
another component of this. When I meet people, before I've met them, I've already researched as much as I can who they are, what they do for a living, how old they are, how many kids they have, if they haven't told me on the phone. I always look at the New York Times wedding column to see if they are mentioned. And weirdly, Adrian, a lot of times they are. Because if you're a professional in New York in the last 20 years, you don't have to be famous to be in the New York Times, and it tells you who their parents are, what their profession is, how old they are.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Wedding announcements are a wonderful thing. They tell you in a couple of paragraphs a lot of stuff about people. So
Especially,
anyhow,
you know how to get to that, you know where to find it, and also from the reporting background what it's useful for or how to analyze it. And then also how to, I was going to say, sleuth through information and
Yes.
go, these are key points. These are items.
And even if it's just a little bit, I mean, I always look up in the States, we call it the multiple listing service about the property. You know, if they had just bought it, I can
Mhm.
go online and see, photographs. And so I have a little idea before I
Sure.
get there of what the house is, if it's a house that's already built, for example. But I want to have enough that, and the reason I do this is when I get there, I want to have enough to be able to lead the conversation and touch on things. And those little bits and pieces, they may not be useful, but sometimes they are to,
Mm.
again, pull that thread through of what they're interested in, what their background is that got them to this point of buying something and wanting to renovate it or, build a new house, whatever it happens to be. And the other thing I do as we go through the process, if we're working on an existing house, I do this thing that I call the preliminary design analysis, the PDA, where I take the property, do some basic design diagrams, do some cost analysis of what they want to do and what it might be. I've already asked them in that first meeting what their budget is,
Mhm.
because without that information, I don't ask them how much they think it will cost. I ask them, because no one knows that. I ask them what their budget is. What do you not want to go beyond, so that we have a starting point. So I can tell them when I work on the PDA, here's a version that gives you everything you asked for, and this costs, $900,000 to renovate your house.
Mhm.
And here's the budget you had was 500. This is what you might be able to do for that.
Oh,
Sometimes
so
people,
you present like the list essentially, but in
yes.
in a drawing format. You present the list of this is what you asked for, and this is what your budget might deliver.
Yeah, I can't always do
No,
that exactly.
yeah,
It's diagrams too. I'm
it's
not
loose.
designing
Yeah,
it. But
yeah.
but you know what I'm saying, that
Hmm.
I'll look at it with my analysis will be, well, here are the things that, I just know can't make it if that's truly the budget. And of course, sometimes people will say, oh, 900 is fine, let's do it.
Yeah,
And others will say, we don't need to have a swimming pool. That's $200,000.
just
Join
so.
the club, and
Yeah.
that's fine. I don't need a swimming pool. It's just
Yeah.
something I thought would be nice. Stuff, it just brings it to the surface, which is what you want to have happen. You don't want to do, you know this, you don't want to do a set of drawings, give it to them. They've spent tens of thousands of dollars with you, and then have them find out, oh, this is $1.2 million and my budget was, 750. It's blows it out of the water and everyone's upset, and you spend all kinds of time and
Mhm.
energy and dreaming. I don't want to do that. So,
I I am so with you on that. The idea is that we get what we draw built. That's the idea. Like we're dealing with somebody's dream,
yes,
and we're an early step in the actual execution of the dream. And we're only one piece of that step. But we're an
exactly.
early foundation. It's like going, oh, well, we're putting in the stumps, or we're putting down the slab. We are the slab. We are that first step. And if we can't get that shored up for them, we're kicking their dream to touch really quickly, and getting them to, first of all, give us their dream without boundaries, and
Yes.
then playing the dream back into what's possible. You made a comment before that I just absolutely love, which was this thing about you're walking around with them and you want them to tell you something. You want them to be open and honest. And even if it sounds goofy, you want to hear it. You want to
Yes.
hear that thing. And there's an old saying I remember. Do you remember a guy called Zig Ziglar?
No, I
Zig
don't.
Ziglar was a motivation coach, and he used to say, casual conversation brings casual results. So in other words, like get on with your conversations. So it's always stuck
Yeah.
with me. And when probably like you with what you just said before, what I'm looking for when I'm going to a home with a client is to end up in casual conversation. I
Mm,
want to be in casual conversation. I
yeah.
want to be where they're relaxed. where they're laughing, where they're enjoying the journey of it. And then
Exactly.
where that casual conversation's coming from, I am listening like a hawk. I am.
Yes,
That's the real piece, because at
exactly.
point, yeah, the magic is hidden in those nuances. And like I know we go to those meetings, and sometimes I think they must, why the hell am I asking about their holiday in France? Why am I relating it to this? What's this? What's that? What were the little keepsakes they brought home from that? What did they have from that? Who did they meet with? Oh, they met from other people with other people from here. Oh, they did this, or just what were the
Yeah,
things that were the highlights that they think are worth sharing?
you're
What were
getting
those
lost.
things? Yeah. And then it's like, how important are those things? Well, so that's a casual conversation, and it gives you the insight into who they truly are. I
Yes,
think
absolutely.
it's that's a beautiful journey to be able to, whilst we're using it like scraping information out of it, they're doing it unguarded. And we're not doing it like we're putting them under any pressure to tell us. And then we get the highlights, we get the beauty. And then I know the number of times clients will go, how did you even remember that piece? And it will be from casual conversation. I'll suddenly go, oh, Kevin, you said about da 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 da. So how would that relate with this thing that you're showing me now? And they're
Right.
like, what? Okay. That kind of,
Yeah.
because understanding that you say about projects, I always believe that we're looking for great people, because with great people come great projects. And it doesn't really matter the size of the project or what it is. It's what are the people like we're going to deal with, because a shocking person to deal with doesn't matter how good their project is. It's miserable as the
Right.
person designing it, and you can't fulfill for them. Um,
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it's funny, I was just thinking about the PDA and this variable of budget versus dream. And what I've also had happen several times in the last few years since I started doing this is that analysis. I did one, for example, not far from my house, young couple, both doctors. They bought the house when they had one kid, and when they called me, they had just had their third.
oh,
And they wanted to expand this little cute English country cottage, 100-year-old house and whatever. I did the analysis for them, and it triggered for them. You know what? We shouldn't dump $500,000 into this house. We should buy another house. And they went out and bought another house, which I'm working on, and thanked me for showing them that this wasn't the right place to do that. It should be a starter house for other young families like they were, 7 years ago.
isn't
And
that wonderful?
yeah, that's a nice thing too. I think, rather than them being disappointed, they were like confident that, you know what, this is buying another house is the thing to do,
Mhm.
not trying to, square hole round
Yeah.
peg problem. So
I,
it has good effects when you may think, oh God, this is a disaster. They don't, it doesn't work for what they want to do, but it isn't. It's the right thing.
I think that's the absolutely beautiful story, in the fact that you enabled them to have their better life.
Yeah,
And you could have easily renovated their home and turned it into what they had imagined it could be, and you can imagine it could be. What they've done is they've improved their position and ability to have their family. And of course, then they're still getting you to do the work that's required on that house. And
yeah,
I think in 24 years, I think I've lost two clients to when they would go to this renovation piece where it's going to be large. And I go to them, have you considered, if we took your budget and what you could sell your house for today, what you could buy? And they're like, no. And I go, well, take your money and go shopping first,
yeah,
because there's going to be these compromises, that we will always be compromises with this current structure.
yeah,
And To change them is going to be, your budget's going to be spent on stuff that isn't going to be worthy of the money. This isn't the house to try and do this too. And
Exactly. That's exactly it, Adrian. Yeah.
it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. And, sometimes it's best to leave things alone and move on to the next thing. And
Mhm.
when I saw this couple a couple of months ago, the three kids were running around having a great time. And I was like, they'd only been there a few months. And I was like, they're at home here. They found a house that it's much better in so many ways, bigger lot, beautiful position, gorgeous house. And, with some tweaks that they want to do, it'll be ideal for them for 25 years. They'll raise these kids and it'll be really nice. So it's not a happy ending, it's a happy beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. No, fantastic. Really fantastic. With your work, you do obviously, well, there's a lot of renovation or additional
Yes.
work that gets done. And then you've got, your landmark society as well, which you've got to work in with. Tell me about that sort of piece of client expectation of what the building will be able to, could become, their dream, and they've got something that's got a historic landmark status of some kind over it. How do you manage getting that dream not only pushed into a budget and manufactured that way, but through what you're allowed to do, because maybe it's historic,
Yeah, so
pedigree.
that's an interesting question, Adrian, because I would say that in New York City, both people who own buildings, meaning houses, or
Yep.
bigger than private houses, but I'm always working on private houses these days. There's a lot of fear. They buy a house, like in the neighborhood I live in, which is an historic district. They buy a house here because of the schools, of transportation. It's easily connected to Manhattan. The highway is a mile away that they can go to the Hamptons, upstate, whatever. So they have all these reasons that aren't necessarily about they wanted to live in a landmark district. Some of them
Hmm.
do. That's even better if they want to be here for that reason. That happens as well. But I'll just tell you a story about when I first started this neighborhood that I live in, that I also grew up in, got designated 27, 28 years ago. This guy that I knew casually saw me in the street, walking down the street to visit my folks. And he said, "Hey, Kevin, we're thinking of doing an addition. I wanted to talk to you." So the upshot of all of this was this is one of the first houses that got, historic house that got worked on in the new district 27 years ago. I almost doubled the size of the house. So from the street, it is double the size visually of what it was.
Wow.
And I have people that come up to me and say, I'm afraid to touch the front of the house. And I'm just like, why? We have so many options here. New York City's has the strictest landmark rules in the country. However, they're very open to good design. So if you
Ah.
do something within the zoning, what's allowable to be
Mhm.
built, that's good design, you have a lot of options. And it's not like I'm saying, yeah, we're going to tear the facade
No.
off the historic house and make it all glass and it's a 100-year-old house. But within the parameters of what zoning allow, the Landmarks Commission cannot tell us not to add on to the building. So this house happened to have a big lot and, a lot of, for a fairly tight suburban lot situation. And it was a house that was important. A woman architect had designed it in 1910 when there were like a dozen women
I was
architects
about to
practicing.
say in the whole of America. Yep.
Yeah. So, it had some, and it's a beautiful house. So I did this edition. They loved it. The commission loved it. Lots of kudos. And that was, a wonderful moment of, and I can point to that and say, look at this house that we did, that we nearly doubled it. It's not quite double the size it was, but we nearly doubled it. And they look at me and they go, "I didn't know that had an addition." And I said, "Right, that's the point.
That is the
If you're going to
point.
work with me, no one's going to know what I did
Mm.
except you and me and the people that worked on it, but no one else should know. That's the point of this, at least in this situation. There are plenty of places in Manhattan. If you've been to Soho, I'm sure, the
Yep.
Cast Iron District. buildings from the 1850s, 60s. And Landmarks has let an empty lot over and over again be filled with glass-fronted building that in some contemporary way echoes what the historic buildings did. And, they win awards and prizes and all of that, the architects that do
My,
that.
yeah,
It's a slightly different attitude, but it's an acceptable attitude. And I teach in the historic preservation program at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, which has an architecture school and a master's in preservation. I take my students to look at this stuff. We do roving walking tours through Manhattan and
hmm
show them. It's like, this is what someone did. It's totally contemporary of our time, surrounded by 19th century buildings, but there's something about what the architect did that makes this fly and be beautiful and a wonderful addition to the district. There are, so many ways to skin a cat, so to speak, and
yeah.
you you have to know what will fly. And some people are just fearful.
And yeah, that's actually just getting your team right. It's about
Yes,
finding the expert that you need and getting your team right. If you're,
exactly.
yeah, like my friend Morris Edgme,
Oh,
MAR. Yeah, Morris does amazing things down in
yes.
Soho. That's one of his kind of zones. And the way they bring the new into the old can just be fascinating. And they
Well, he's
create
a perfect
something for,
example of it,
yeah.
Adrian. He's the man. Yes.
Yeah,
No,
he's
that's
brilliant. I
amazing.
love like looking at his work and like talking to him about what he's doing and why his thinking's running this way. He's yeah, and that's horses for courses, but the same thing like you're saying in like a historic district with being able to do this with a single residential home, being able to go, you know what? Don't be afraid to ask.
Right.
Yeah, like this is the journey of exploring. That's something that I think really heavily, and I try and press upon my clients and then on people who are looking to do projects, is design is a discovery journey.
Mm.
And we we could walk away from a piece of land and draw a house. It's neither here nor there. That's not hard to do. That is what we just make decisions and put something together.
Yeah,
But we can't draw the house for you when we walk away from that piece of land because we don't necessarily know who you are. That was that thing around
exactly.
the avatars. So it's discovery, and you don't know who you are in the context of having a new home, or you think you do, but that's like, you buy a mobile phone and you find out it can do 10,000 things you didn't know it could do. You buy a car and you learn all the nuances once you're in it. We're trying to learn the nuances before we get you in it because you're actually going to live inside it. So yeah, that
Yes,
part of it,
every day.
yeah, it's going to shape your life. And so
Yeah.
this is another point with it. When you're breaking down your process before, you do your PDA, and with that PDA and you look at the budget and the wish list, how often, or the thing, how often are they a lovely match? How often do those things
Oh,
match well?
Adrian, I think you know the answer to this. They rarely match. In
Mm,
fact, they never match. There's always, I would say, they're always more than what people think they will cost, is my experience. Especially, the last few years with the pandemic has really blown apart construction costs here.
yeah,
I think everywhere.
everywhere. Everywhere.
But, it really skewed things for a while. That was very tough to have a handle on. I work with several contractors that I like to work with that I recommend. I have nothing to do with them financially, but my experience in wherever I happen to be working, if it's Connecticut, I have a couple of guys there that I love working with. If it's here in New York, depending on the neighborhood, I have a couple of guys and they're terrific. And so when I do the PDA, I engage them to help with the numbers. It's not just like out of my head because they're dealing with the numbers changing every day. And
Mm.
they're much more into the moment of what the market is like in that moment. But it's very hard to get a match, I would say, where the budget and the program, the scope of work actually match.
Yeah,
It's,
I've never done it yet.
yeah,
And I I like the fact that you do that piece where you take what their budget will create and give them some sense of what that would be versus what their wish list or their desired list is. You said you work in closely with some builders. How do you put that into the process? Because this is this fair thing again. I see
Yeah,
so many designers, architects, their projects don't get built. And the reason they don't get built is 99% of the time is because of the cost of the project.
yeah,
And you said it earlier, they've gone tens of thousands of dollars down a track to just have their feet kicked out from underneath them, basically. And that's something that, I know in your case, I know in my case, I totally want to avoid. That's the last position I ever want to be in with these people, is that we've gone too far. And so you work in with the contractor. When do you put this into the process? What happens? How does it happen? And
day
who
I
pays
meet
for
them.
them? How does it all happen?
Day I meet them, Adrian, is how it happens because at this point in my life, at this point in my career, I do not want to be in a position where I have a client who says, I want to bid this out to four contractors. And I tell them, I said, look, the way I work, I want to have a contractor who's on board the day I start this for you so that that guy can tell us we're veering off track, this is too much, keep whatever we're developing into the scope of what your budget is. And if you don't want to work that way, great, find someone else. I'm not into bidding things out. What I found, especially in New York, what I found with bidding things out years ago is that each of them operate, I can tell them they have 30 days. I walk through with three guys, they take notes, they bring their electrician, blah, blah, blah. One will get it back in 45 days, despite the 30-day deadline. Another 60 days, another 3 months, because he's busy. But the owner wants to wait, and it throws everything off track. There's a psychological thing that happens when you're waiting around for this, and it creates this angst and doubt in the client. And what I tell them, which is totally true, is like, I want to work with a contractor that I trust, that I know, who's fair. He's not going to be the cheapest guy on the block. And if you want the cheapest guy on the block, you don't want me either. You
Because
know,
I'm not the cheapest guy on the
I'm
block
not the
either.
cheapest guy. I'm not the most expensive guy. I have low overhead. It's not that,
Yeah.
but I'm not the cheapest guy. I'm good.
Yeah.
So I work with people who are good, who are ethically, morally proper, that are trustworthy. And I'm telling you they're trustworthy. And if you don't believe me, we shouldn't work together. There are
Yeah.
plenty of guys that you can play the game of bidding it out. Because I've seen that. I've seen it with friends of mine who are architects and they're 60 years old going, oh, it's been bid out. It's a disaster. And we got this horrible contractor. He's an idiot. I never met him before. It's like, right, if you're going to play that game. So what I do tell them, which is true, if you have somebody who's part of the team from day one, you are going to save money
Oh, yeah.
because this guy is going to help us in the design phases to, control the costs. If,
Mm,
they start doing that,
mm.
you're going to know. And it may not be that, it's exactly what you wanted to spend in your head, but it's what it should cost. And you'll get a great job out of it because we know this is a great contractor. So I have a handful of them depending on where I am. I call them up. Are you interested? Do you have time? Do you want to meet them? This is the project. They always say yes.
They
And
like
if
working with you too.
yes, they like working with me too. And occasionally, when one has said, "Oh my God, I'm so booked," I'm glad to hear that because I don't want to be slipped into my project slipped into the slot where he's jockeying because I've seen
Mhm.
that scenario.
Mhm.
So the good ones will tell you, I booked out stuff for a year. I can't do it. If you want to wait a year, and I recently had a wonderful couple here in my neighborhood, the guy that I recommended to them, he said, I can't fit them in until next October. And they said, fine, we'll wait. So they know.
That's
And
fine.
in the past, I've had the other scenario. It's like, I'm never going there again. I learned that lesson years ago.
So does the contract, when they're going to work with you on the creation of the job, you're forming your team. You obviously
Yeah,
can have an engineer and you're going to have, different
yes,
consultants. So, yeah.
a bunch of
Um,
them.
how do you establish with your client who's going to be involved in the project and the contractor being one of them and who needs to be paid for what when? What happens with that?
Yeah, so that can happen a variety of ways. I have a lot of clients, I'm not sure why, but it's fine, who want to deal with the contractor directly. And sometimes I will review their bill. And sometimes they're like, no, just have them send the bill. It's fine. I don't need you to review it. So it happens both ways, if that's the question you're asking. And, it's a process that, and the other thing to answer your question, the consultants, like in New York City, for example, I have to have an expediter that takes my project to the Department of Buildings because that's
Mhm.
a morass. I don't have time to wade through that.
Or
And
the
I,
or your expertise isn't going to be as current constantly as theirs would be. Yeah,
no, my expertise is design. It's not
yeah.
running paperwork and dealing with
We're
the
the
guys that,
same.
right. So anyhow, I tell him, I said, I will, the surveyor, the guy that surveys the property, I will draw up what we need from each of them. They will send me their contract made out to you. You sign, I'll tell you, I'll get anything that's missing put in there because sometimes they miss stuff,
Hmm.
even though I
Hmm.
send them lists. And then you pay them directly. And with the contractor, if you want me to review their invoices, I'm glad to do that. But most of them, they never ask me for the most part. Every once in a while, someone will ask, but most of the time, they just want to get the invoice and pay it. They
Get
know
it
what
paid.
the bill is, the big bill. Certainly, sometimes fluctuations in some of the goods change things a bit, or if they change their mind at all. But the great thing about the process of design with people, I want to be in the situation where no one is standing in the house during construction, the owner waving their hands around and saying, oh, let's do this. I don't have that happen anymore because we do everything in the office. I have meetings, we go over it, we stand in the house, I walk through as much as possible. Most people are not 3D in the way they think. They know what's going to happen. They've seen it. We've
Hmm.
worked closely enough to develop it. It's not like I plop it down and say, this is what we're doing, and here it goes off to the GC. It's like, are you good with this? Do you understand this? If you don't understand it, you have to let me know. I want to know if you don't get it. And
100%.
years ago, occasionally I'd have people say to me, thankfully, they'd go, I never thought it would look like this, but I love it. And that was thankfully, that's all I can say.
I've
And they
had,
never said once that, I don't really know what you're doing. I think they got most of it, but I think what they were really saying is, I never imagined it would be so beautiful,
yeah,
even though you told me it would be, is kind of
yeah.
what was coming out. But it's tough. People who are not trained in design, they have a lot of trouble envisioning stuff unless they've worked with an architect before.
Hmm.
My repeat clients, they're just like, let's go. They're raring to go and they have a good idea of what's ahead. So that's nice when that happens.
I love that. I love that. The other part of that question was, so I do a very similar process to you, like identical, in fact. What we do with ours when we go to contractors, so we'll go out, we'll ring two or three of them, and we think that these would be a good match with these clients, they're the right kind of people. These ones might find this one a bit different from that one or whatever. Anyway, who's available first? Who's capable of doing this job in the sense of it's within the realm of their expertise. So I'm doing one at the moment that's what we call a Queenslander, which is a kind of a Victorian styled
Oh,
country home. And
oh,
with that, I go, well, some of my more contemporary, modern builders, this would be more of a challenge for them. That they would be learning the detailing, they would be learning the kind of methodology. Not that they couldn't do it, but it would be more of a challenge. So I go, they're not my people. Then
right.
it's more, okay, who is my person? So anyway, We do a thing on our contracts with clients where we say we will interview as many builders as you like, to tell you the truth, but we can charge you for everyone we interview. So let's make because we're going to spend our time and we're going to have to go and visit them on site, all these things. And sometimes the client says, we've got this builder, we've got this GC. I go, great, my process is, it starts with them when we're starting drawing. And that's when they're a part of the process. So if you're keen to lock them in, I'm going to need this from them and the level of transparency of costings. So let me meet with them first, because otherwise it's not going to work. We may not be the meet. We may not be a match. And I can't guarantee your outcome if we're not going to get the match. So then I will go and meet with them, say, show me, some preliminaries. I'm going to give you some pencils like this with some measurements and stuff on it and all the rest. And we're going to be talking about these kind of finishes. What will you be able to give me with that? What kind of numbers are you going to give me? How detailed will you be able to get? And with that, I now have a lot of my builders, GCs for you guys, that we have the client meet with a couple, sometimes just one, but I try to keep it to two max, because they cut this thing. Yes, the GC is working for them, not for me.
Correct.
But the relationship is strong with me, and they're yet to develop that relationship. So meet a few, it's fine. That's not a problem. When you've met a few, though, we need to make a decision before we get all our construction drawings done. We need to do this decision early so that we can be real-time value engineering your project with somebody who's got it. And they will often now, just about always, they set up a preliminary construction agreement for the design phase with the client, and they put a lump sum on it. They might go, oh, this is going to be, $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is. And we see that the design phase is going to be, through this conceptual design phase, it's going to be 3, maybe 4 months long. And through that time, we think that we'll be able to supply, 6 different costings plus meetings plus whatever, as the discovery of design, as this journey comes through. And as the client learns themselves, as they learn me, as they learn the contractor, as they learn all these things, different things morph out of the design phase. And they're being paid. The GC's being paid. I wouldn't say like anything like they're going to get paid to build the house, but they have the opportunity to lose the opportunity to build the house while they go through this phase. That's when it's going to fall over or work. They're either going to make it through that or they're not going to make it through that. And that's going to be telling of how the next piece of the process will go. So I say to clients, it's a lovely way to make a choice, work closely with them, understand them, they'll understand you, decide whether you're going to take that, $3 million out of your bank and put it in their bank when we really get down to construction.
Yes.
Decide whether that's the relationship, and have you got your person here with you? I'm comfortable with them. Have we got your person? And it's a cheap way. It's not a cheap way. It's a really good way to find out and get comfortable and get the nuances out, especially also when like you or I is almost the referee in there. We're going, okay, well, that would, the client may ask for something. I go, it's going to be well out of the scope of this piece. That's going to be so custom that there's going to be another person who's going to create that for the builder.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be beyond that kind of piece. So yeah, what I have seen a lot is a lot of my guys now just charge for that first piece. A set fee. Yeah.
I think that's a great way to do it. I've offered something similar to some of the contractors I work with, Adrian, and it's funny, most of them have just said, no, I'll just do it, because I guess they're confident they're going to get it.
Yeah.
I tell the client when we're having a first meeting with a contractor is, you need to tell me what your gut feeling is. This is like marriage. And if you have a bad feeling when that guy walks through the door and says hello, something's going on and you need to pay attention to it, whatever it is, and you may not be able to express it, but you might. And that tells you something because you don't want to be in, as you know, building a house, renovating a house, restoring a house, it's a long-term process and you're with that person a lot. And you
Mm.
better, you don't have to be best buddies with them. You don't have to be friends with them, but you better like them enough to talk about stuff that's, it's about money, it's about the quality of what's being done, all of those things. And I remind the client that I'm the official go-between,
Yep.
and you should not be telling them directly what you want to have happen without telling me. And if I happen not to be there, it's, they look at me and they go, you mean I can't talk to the contractor when I go to the house? It's like, no, you can talk to him. But if you have some kind of conversation about design work and construction, I need to know. And,
Mm.
most contractors, even the ones I work with all the time, they're not going to call me up and go, oh, Sally said this at our meeting. They're just on to the next thing. They're not calling me up worried about that. So I need to know what's happening. But most of
Yeah.
them are good. It happens occasionally, and it can derail a project quite
Oh,
literally.
yeah. I
It
think
starts to
the rules of the game in this
yeah,
space, they sit with the contractor and with the client. And I make sure
yes,
I have the conversation with them both in the room at the
yes,
same time and agree to anything that making on the fly decisions about is a
yeah,
conversation that they have with me. And typically, the thing is they're not actually having it with the GC, they're having it with the site supervisor.
right,
And that isn't always going to be the GC. He may come or she may come and go from the site, but there's somebody who's running the site who,
right.
will be walking through with them at different times and they'll go, oh, I didn't imagine this like this, or I didn't whatever it is. And then there may be no need for any more conversation at that point, or there may be need for a greater conversation. And I'm like, I have an agreement with my GCs. I will not give building advice. I will not. No building advice will ever be given from me. And
As long as they don't give design advice.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, you don't give design advice. And if the client says, what would you like it to be like? You go, I don't know, it's not my home, but what would you really, if it was your home, what would you have? In this situation, I don't know. Like, I don't know it well enough. So yeah, let's get Adrian on the phone and just ask him what he thinks you should do with it or whatever.
Right.
And clients will put builders in a very I would say, vulnerable position
Yeah.
when it's like that. And so I make my clients have the same rules. Well, I don't say I make them, I request the same rules of them. I say, because it'll only derail, you will only get worse off. If the builder sees something that they think would really enhance the project while they're building it, I say to them, come to me first and say, if I do this, or if we were to do this, would that be great? Would that work? We had a project a few years back where we'd positioned a window and it had this a view. I was going to say amazing view. It wasn't an amazing view. It was an okay view, but we'd positioned this window to get light and take in this particular tree. And with this tree, the surrounding piece of foliage. And it was actually in a national reserve. So tree's pretty stable. Before that we got to that level, that house was 3 levels high. Before we got to that level, the tree fell down in a big windstorm.
Well,
But what it did is it gave us a better view, but
mm,
longer, and that tree, which was fairly close, opened it up for us. With
mm,
doing that, we were able to, and it's a small change, but we were able to shift the window to better line up what was now our longer visual view out of it, whereas otherwise we would have kind of had a slightly partial, and it would have, nobody would have noticed. We would have noticed, but the builder rang me and said, hey, that big windstorm that came through, it actually took out that tree out the back there. And this because he knew the project for so long, because he'd been working with us right from the start. And he said, but you're going to love what you can see now, because we actually got some more trees in, and we got like a piece of a mountain that was
Wow.
in the, and that was where we were able to go. He goes, I think we could probably shift some things here and probably get better out of it. And I'm like, show me on the phone first and I'll meet you on site tomorrow. Then we went back, did it, and then we were able to say to the client, I said, look, that storm that came through, my builder was Steve. I said, Steve observed this, so we're thinking we'll make a window change here. It's not, degrade anything else. In fact, it's going to enhance this piece of the house, blah, 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 blah. But he did the right thing by coming to me first. Also, he was observant enough to see it. Like,
Yes.
yeah. So,
Which is nice. That's an experienced contractor who's been
yeah.
around the block a few times, who knows the ropes. Yeah,
And this is about picking the team again, isn't it?
it really is. I had
Yeah.
you reminded me, I did a new house out in Montauk a while back. Beautiful house. And the contractor was excellent, Adrian, high quality. I never worked with him. And he did something no one has ever done before to me. And the interior designer that worked for me at the time, we did this beautiful kitchen, and we did what I call mixing metals. Some of the faucetry was chrome and some of the light fixtures were brass, blah, blah, blah. He saw that on the order. He never called me, never said anything. He switched everything to chrome because he thought it was a mistake. And I've never had anyone do that without calling me and saying, "Is this okay? Is this what you guys wanted?" And that was an experience that it just blew me away that he would do that. But it was an experience that said, "I will never use you again
Yeah.
because of that." Despite your great work, and I didn't say anything to him, just saying what I felt, because that was a sign of mistrust in a way, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
professionalism and things like that. So funny stuff happens with people where all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, it's about me," when
I
they're
ha
part of the team, and that's that.
I have a similar kind of situation that happens quite often on my projects. So not that they go and order it, but they come back and check. I will often, depending on what the viewpoint of the house is going to be, I may change the color of the window joinery, because we
Mm.
use a lot of aluminium windows. So a lot of
Yeah.
our windows are aluminium. And so you go and you order aluminium windows, and the builder would like you to order all black frames or all white frames or all silver frames or whatever. And I go, well, this view here is out over the sea. And if we use this one here, maybe we should use silver aluminium frames. But we've got this view to the side here, not in the same room, but in maybe another room, where we're actually looking into a forest, into heavily wooded stuff. And we might use black aluminium in that piece, because of the fact that those window frames are going to disappear into the forest and make our openings look bigger. You can't view necessarily the house all at the same time. You'd be in this room versus this room. So I'll mix them. And that is one that I go, so when we create our construction drawings, I go, this is the sheet that has all the silver anodized. And this is all the sheet that has, the black, whatever it is, 2-pack or whatever, powder coated. This is this is where I've got timber, because sometimes we will do, it might be a old building and we will be being sympathetic to parts of that. And then we're building something really new that's attached to the old building or semi-attached to the old building. And so we're not going to take those things and put them in this piece necessarily. But that's one of those ones where, yeah, you kind of, you've got to put a loop around. I'm very clear about how we present it, but it doesn't
Yeah.
always get that way. Yeah.
And I never mind if someone calls and says, "Is this correct or is it a mistake?" I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
what they're there for, really, is to be, as you say, part of the team. Your role as the designer, my role is to be as clear as possible. That's a great way to do it, what you described. But if they have any of their doubts, I just want them to call. And I don't think they're saying you're an idiot. Did you really intend this? They're just like, I want to check. That's what they
Yeah.
should be doing. That's the
And
idea.
and the call costs nothing. Unless there's
Right.
a body of work to put behind it, it's just advice. It's on the fly. Let's go. Keep moving.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. I want you to tell me about a couple of your projects. Red Barn would
Oh,
be one.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
so the Big Red Barn is a really fun project that we just finished last year. And this is a couple from Manhattan. It was the maybe a year into the pandemic. They were getting antsy, and the wife's cousin, her best friend, I'd done a house for them, a new house on a lake up in Connecticut. And so they were visiting the cousins up in Connecticut and said, gosh, it'd be really nice to be here. We're going nuts, cooped up in our Manhattan apartment. And so Mimi, the cousin who has the house there, said, there's a house right across the street for sale. And then Mimi wrote me a note and said, my cousin and her husband are buying this house. It's perfect for you. It's really old, because Mimi knows that I love working on old
oh,
buildings, even though
geez.
I did a new house for them. So I went up with my wife Alex during the pandemic. We wore masks. It was a very hard meeting actually because of that
Yeah.
tension. It was 2021. But anyhow, we got it done despite all the crazy stuff that went on. And the barn was a cow barn. This part of Connecticut had a lot of dairy farms. It still has a few from 1889. And the way we found
Wow.
out the date was we were crawling around with the contractor in the cellar and the client in this dark stone basement that had boulders that were 3 feet by 3 feet in spots, water coming through them from some stream that was nearby and leaching through. And, everyone's got their cell phones. There was no little bare light bulb in that part. And Seth, the contractor, goes, oh my God, there's a date here. And we're all down there looking at this and, dusting it off. And it was 1889.
Wow.
And that was kind of amazing. So that was a really fun project because this was part of a farm that they bought, 3 acres, and it has an 1820s brick farmhouse, which in New England is very unusual, but it turns out that this part of Connecticut had brick kilns, and so it made sense, and the
Mhm.
farmers were a little wealthier. So they asked to do the barn first as a guest house, and it had some Oingapache guest apartment that had been built maybe in the 1950s, and
Mhm.
this enormous hayloft, the second floor of this, that was 20 feet from the floor to the ridge line in the hayloft. Rob, the husband, said, all he said was, I want to have a big screen TV up here. I want to bring people up here. And even though it'll be a guest house, this will be the party space. It's like, okay. And it is I call it the cathedral. It was all dark wood. It had beautiful beams, however, that were H-shaped that held it up.
Mhm.
They were all pegged
Mhm.
together, and they had iron rods running through them to pull it together. It's a very unique way that a barn is built in that era in Connecticut. I did my usual research. And so we jacked the building up, took the stone foundation out because the contractor assessed it with me and he said, there's no way I can waterproof this. There's no way I can keep this dry. It's collapsing in spots. There were, rubble that I can't repair. So we actually took all the stones out, built a new poured concrete foundation, set it back on top, a big move that cost a pretty penny.
Oh, yeah.
It made everything work. And so what we did is the first floor, which is, it had a ramp up to it with double doors. And in the 50s, they moved the entry away. So I use those double doors that, they slide back. I'm sure,
Yep.
Australian barns
Well,
are similar. So that's the main entry. And so that first floor that's at grade, that became two bedrooms with their own bathroom. And then there's a beautiful meadow behind the house. And so the whole back of the house is kitchen, dining, and living room open. And then if you go upstairs, the party room has off in one corner another guest room with its bath,
Mm.
and it's all open. There's a big U-shaped bar there, and they've had it now for a year that they've been using it. They had their nephew's pre-wedding party there, the nephew whose family is across the street. They've had a million friends up from the city, and two of their kids are college age, so they've been bringing their friends from college there during breaks and filling the house with all these young kids, and they're having a ball.
Sounds
So
fantastic.
we're starting to getting the contractor to bid out the drawings that I finished a couple of weeks ago. And so they moved into this fall, they moved into the barn, and we cleared out the farmhouse, which has boards in it. The floorboards are 2 feet wide. I don't know what that translates into meters, but like 3/4 of a meter, I guess. They're
Uh-huh.
really
Really,
wide,
really wide. Yeah.
really wide, that I suspect are from, the site originally. And so I use a firm in Manhattan that analyzes the structural engineer, since the house is also timber frame. He had to have an analysis of what exactly the wood was. So we brought someone up from New York. They analyzed the mortar, they analyzed the brick, so that wherever we're doing repairs, the mortar, even though it'll be lighter because the mortar
Sure.
is 200 years old, it will match, the brick will match. They found a company that makes a similar brick, even though it's a handmade brick.
Hmm.
So there's little details like that that are, kind of
Beautiful.
technical, but it's really a beautiful spot, and I'm excited about it. They've been so much fun to work with, and they're excited. They know how great the barn turned out, and the barn, when I first met them, it's painted gray. And we were standing there, and I'm looking at it, because every barn in Connecticut is basically red, Adrian.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and I was like, look, the gray is peeling off. This barn was red. So we used a red that was similar to the original red, which is why it's red again. And, it got rebuilt inside out. It's all, the latest and greatest technical systems in terms of electric and
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
like
It's
that
it's
for
a
it. So,
modern structure, but yeah.
yeah. But the beams, when people go up to the second floor, they're just like knocked out. It's
Mm.
just a beautiful, beautiful space. So I was really happy with that. So the farmhouse is a different beat. The ceilings are,
Much
seven and a half
lower.
feet tall. On the second, I'm 6 feet tall, which is 2 meters, a little less than two
Yeah.
meters. And I was scraping my head on the second floor. So we're pulling all of that down, and the structural beams that are up there, the ceiling joists, are 4 feet apart.
Okay.
So we're lifting the ceiling above them, and they're actually about 3 inches above my head. So guys my height will be able to walk through there, but it'll be much higher. You won't feel like you're
Yeah.
being crushed on the second floor. Unfortunately, my clients who been living there for 3.5 years on weekends are not so tall, so it didn't
Hmm.
bother them.
Hmm.
But they have the boys in their family in college have lots of tall friends who were like ducking sideways as they went upstairs.
Also, you're spending the money pretty much regardless. So to ease it like that just makes so much sense, like
Yeah.
yeah, it's it's their home now. In the future, it'll be somebody else's home. And yeah,
Well, what I think is amazing about a house like that is, it's got 200 years of renovations. It
mm,
has an addition on it from the addition is 100 years old,
yeah,
Adrian. It's
right.
not
Love it.
happened. And, when we pulled the ceiling down in the living room, which was just sheetrock and it's kind of all wavy, pulled it down, all the beams were exposed. And the guy that came up to analyze the beams said, these are oak and they took it to a lab. You can't tell by
Yeah.
looking at it. These are oak and hickory, which the engineer was able to different calculations. But we stood there and it's like, can we leave this exposed? That was one of the questions. So as it turns out, and this was amazing, there are some of the beams are half logs that
Oh,
still have their bark on them. The
wow.
rest of them are square, and there you can see the chop marks
The
of the
edging of them.
yes. So it's
Wow.
pretty fabulous. So as it turns out, the half round ones, which are smaller, we're not going to be able to expose them because of plumbing hanging down into this living room ceiling. But the big ones will sit down maybe a couple of inches from a new ceiling that will go in. So you'll be able to, get some sense of what this house is about. And the living room is 24 by 32. And let's see, meters, that would be 8 meters by,
Yeah.
yeah, 12 meters or
Divide by
something.
three, basically. Yeah.
It's a big room with, low ceiling, but I can see on the floor where all these little rooms of the farmhouse were, where, walls were pulled out and patched in. So there was probably 5 rooms where the living room is now. But you walk in and, even though it's a low ceiling, it's just like this expansive room, but it's a mess, it's going
Yeah.
to such a transformation. And the other great thing, I tell clients this all the time, it's wonderful that they got to live there for a couple of years because they've seen the sun come up, they've seen every
Mm,
season.
mm.
I'm sure you feel the same way when this can happen. People get to know the house, and I work on houses sometimes in New York City where people will have spent 20 minutes in the house before they plunk down, $1 million+. They have no idea, and they just want to start.
Mm.
They can't always move in. It may not be practical, but it's nice when that happens, that someone's experienced the house before we get to work on it and,
I,
listen to it. They love
I,
and hate it.
yeah. And I think it deepens their story and connection with the home and the landscape around it. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I, I, yeah, I love when people have had that opportunity to, I think sometimes learn to live with what the things are as well. So there's pieces that
Yes.
they may never want, but they go on a bit of a discovery and they learn to live with certain things and they discover something about themselves in that. And it's very easy for them to go, no, that's got to go. That piece, we can't live like that. It's also the little nuances that they go, we would have never done this, but we really enjoy this.
Yeah.
There's this nook here or there's this piece here. We don't want to lose that anymore, like that growth that happens between the human and the house. I love that. I love
I
that.
think that's such a great point because, especially because a lot of the work I do is on houses that are old and I will say quirky.
Hmm.
There's good quirky and there's, really awful quirky,
Oh yeah.
but you're talking about, it's exactly what you said. I've had houses that I've met somebody and they're just like, oh, I can't stand this. And, they end up living there for a year or two while we're working on it, whatever. And they're like, I really came to love that weird little bench and the landing on the
Yeah.
stair that I thought, why would they have a bench there? Who's ever going to sit there? But it's really quaint and charming and don't touch that,
Yeah.
let's leave
Yeah.
that. So yeah, I think it's a great point of what
I
what people discover about themselves.
yeah, I love it. I love that piece. You're also doing a new build currently, and like I love this land whispering of understanding land and how you site it and what you do with a house. Tell me about the new build that you're working on and how that's going
Yeah.
to come together. And you you know your environment. And so then how are you getting to form and shape this new home based on having this knowledge and then also, I suppose, the energetic quality of the land?
Yeah, so this literally, I just got the survey, I just got the check to begin the PDA, the
Yeah.
preliminary design analysis. So this is a piece of land down on the shoreline, a couple blocks from where I live, that I have walked by, since I was a child, except for the years I lived in Manhattan and other places. And it was someone's garden of another house, and it's the last lot. There are 25 houses that face the shore in this community I live in. It's the last lot that can be built on.
Wow.
So for this family, for their son and his wife. So it's a very, by many standards, a very tight lot.
Hmm.
It's, let's see, 30 meters by 30 meters. So
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
not, yeah.
But it's a big square.
It's a big square, yeah.
Wow.
And it's a corner lot,
Hmm.
so it faces the bay.
Which is north.
The bay is actually west
Oh,
toward
west.
Manhattan,
Okay.
and you can see some of the super talls
Oh, right.
West
Yep.
57th Street over the skyline when you look out from it if
Hmm.
you're on the second floor. So it's a sloping piece of land. It faces the community owns a 200-foot long dock together because we all own the shoreline together. So there's a road that separates it from the community shoreline. And it's just a terrific site, 280-degree views of the bay because of its
Wow.
position on the corner. The couple wants a big front porch, which I love that idea, of course. We
To
haven't
the
gotten
to the street, or
to
is
the
that to the
street.
community
That's both,
access?
it's to the street and it's to the community property, and the Long Island Sound is basically what we're looking at.
Yeah.
So I've worked on several houses along the shoreline, and 2 years ago I finished a garden for an enormous house that was built in 1907, where everyone wants to sit in the front of their house facing Long Island Sound.
Hmm.
And so the trick is I call the road the promenade. It's only about 15 feet wide. It's only one car length. You can only go in one direction. So people walk in the street. They don't walk on the sidewalk, Adrian. You just kind of snake around people.
Yep.
And so what I do with because of my landscape training is I'm always thinking of ways, how can I have somebody sitting up on their porch or their terrace, looking out at this magnificent view and not have them feel like they're in a fishbowl, the folks that are walking along the shoreline, because it's a public road, it's a New York City road. And it's about hedging and looking at sight lines, measuring, literally measuring the sight line. If someone is, as close to the house as they can be and as far from the house on the public road, what can you see? I'm sure you
Same,
deal with
same. Yep.
this issue all the time as well. And it's about landscaping, and it's about not blocking the people that have the house, but blocking them from view of the people on the street. Sometimes the plants have to grow, but it's
I,
part of the fun of figuring it out. So I'm very excited about this. They want to do a traditional style home. It's a landmark district, so it blends in with the other houses around it. And it's got its adjacent neighbor is one of the biggest houses there. It takes up the entire end of a New York City block, and it's 1919 brick mansion that is very impressive. And the house on the other side of it is not a small house, but it's shingled, cedar shingles. It's much more modest. So I have to bridge these two
for the
buildings,
planning commission. Yeah.
and for the Landmarks Commission
Yeah.
to
That's what I
say, yeah,
mean.
that
Yeah.
fits, and that the family is happy with it. So it's just the kind of challenge I love, Adrian.
Oh, that's worth getting your teeth into, man. That's so exciting.
I
Yeah.
can't wait to dive into this one. No, it'll be really, and they're such a nice family, and the whole family is involved, which, that could be bad, but in this case, I think it's
It's good.
a good. They
I,
really care about the place.
yeah, absolutely. Look, the constraints are what make the magic, aren't they? Like it's where you get innovative and it's where you get to play because the rules are they're laid down, but they're not firm. It's like, where do we test the edges? And not for the purpose of breaking the rules, but for the purpose of creating
Yeah,
something that's wonderful. And I love that piece that you were saying about, these sight lines and how these
yes,
sight lines need to work. I think so often homes are built and there's no thought to the landscaping. And
yeah,
we, as designers, you've got 30 meters by 30 meters. That's everything you can influence in this. Beyond
right.
that, you can't influence it. And so getting to use those well, all of it, with landscaping and the journeys that it creates and the way the house connects into the landscaping and falls together, that's, man, magical, man. I'm excited to see what you do with it.
Yeah, and I'll just the additional overlay of this is that this community was built and created before zoning in New York City because it starts in 1906. So there was no zoning. So to ensure that it would be single family houses and have this kind of green, it's a garden suburb is what
Mhm.
they're officially called. The Brits are the creators of this idea, connected by railroad. So they have deed restrictions that I have to comply with, and the deed restrictions, they're no problem for me, but we can't build a barn on the project for horses. That's the first one that I don't have to worry about. But there are others, and it's also got New York City zoning, so I have to comply with setbacks on two streets and the
Yes.
backyards, the
Yes.
two backyards that hit the since it's a corner lot.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of stuff to digest and wade through and explain to the owner
Yeah.
what the impact will be and the time it takes to do that, to go to all the agencies, including the local homeowners association reviews it, something called a community board, which is like a mini town hall in this part of Queens where the houses reviews it, the landmarks commission, the buildings department. It just goes on and on. It's a lot of stuff, and that's why it takes a while to get through it. But it's the stuff I love doing. So,
Yeah,
and right
that was when I was saying earlier about, 70% of the journey is the emotional journey that we go on. We're just wrangling all the different things that need to come out of it. And
right,
30% is actually that kind of work piece that you end up doing with that.
yeah.
It's fascinating. Fascinating. I have a last question for you, and it's going to be it's a personal one about your favorite space in your own home.
Oh, I don't have to skip a beat to tell you what it is, Adrian. It
Is that
is
easy?
it's that easy. It is a screen porch at the opposite end of our house, and it is my wife's favorite spot. It's my favorite spot, and it's our black cat Phoebe's favorite spot. The three of us will be out there from early April until mid-November, this past November. Usually we make it to Halloween and it's over. This year, the weather was very warm in New York, and we'll even go out there if it's cool with blankets. We don't have heaters out there, and it's just a seasonal porch. It's not glassed in, and it's just a great place to be. The birds are all around us. There are a lot of, it sounds like you're in the Amazon rainforest sometimes out there for all the birds that are in New York. Since we live on the water, not our house directly, we're the second one in, but the geese are flying over us. There are osprey in the tree adjacent to the porch, that a majestic bird with a funny little voice. I don't know if you
Hmm.
have them in Australia, but they're just
No.
beautiful.
Well, maybe they do, but I haven't seen them where I live. We've got pelicans. So.
Oh yeah, we don't have You have to go to Florida for pelicans, and
Mhm.
they don't come up this high. But anyhow, it's a favorite spot. It was a tiny little porch originally that was, maybe 3 meters by 4 meters, and my dad about 50 years ago expanded it. And so when we got the house about 10 years ago, I had to rebuild it. So I rebuilt it with pergolas around the edge. So it blended a little better than my father's quickie design of his.
So
Um,
did you buy your family home?
yes. So my wife and I, Alex, had a house a few blocks from here when we got married that we thought that was going to be our forever house, and that was that. And my mom died about 11 years ago, and my brother lives in Florida, and he wasn't interested in the house. And we were sitting on the porch one day clearing stuff out, and Alex just said to me, there's a very nice view of the water from here. We're not on the water, but there's this very oblique view, and it's kind of nice here. And I called up my brother and I said, Bob, what do you think? Can I buy you out and we won't put it on the market? And he said, yeah, okay. So that's what happened,
Duh.
and done. And, we of course renovated it, new kitchen. The baths had already been done. So not a lot of work, but enough.
I
And
love it.
it's a great spot to be. It's really nice. We're on a peninsula, the neighborhood. And
Uh-huh.
so we're just a block from the tip of the peninsula, overlooking Long Island Sound. So I just walk out the door, hang a left, and there's a beautiful cove with all these shorebirds, and then the open sound when you walk a block away. It's really fun to be
Wow.
here. Great neighbors to boot. So bonus points for that.
Yeah, now you've thrown my questioning. I've got to run it in two ways. One is is I want you to go back now to when you were a kid in that house. And what was your favorite spot in that house when you were a kid?
The attic.
The attic. And why?
Well, my parents bought this house at a sealed bid auction. The woman who had lived here had no heirs, and she was a children's book writer. And so the house came with all the furnishings, and her family, she was related to, I don't know if they have these in Australia, Eberhard Faber, the pencil company, and
Oh,
they
the
were
pencil, you mean?
Germans.
If it like Stable Mars. What
Yeah,
was,
same
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
That. So they were Germans that came to New York maybe in the 1860s, opened a factory. Mrs. Barringer was the lady's name who lived here. She died in her early 60s and left the house to a family across the street. So as and the house was, she was an alcoholic and the house was just a wreck. And my
Mhm.
mother was quite upset with the wreck that she inherited. But I love to go up to the attic because there were all these books. This couple, her husband and she, spoke 7 languages. They read Sanskrit. They had books like you've never seen, and there were just tons. There were steamer trunks. You've reminded me. There were steamer trunks with tags from all these places that, a little boy was like, "Where's Bremen? Where's this? Where's that?" And there were
Bremen
these.
is where Beck's bear comes from, and the story of the donkey, the dog, the cat, and the rooster.
There you go.
I spent a lot of time in Bremen.
Really? Oh, how
Hmm.
funny. So it
Hmm.
was fun. I loved going up there and hunting around because a lot of this, as they cleared out the house and, renovated and brought our family stuff in, some of it went to the attic, some of it went to the trash. But they had a lot of, for a middle class kid from Queens, there was a lot of stuff here that I had never seen, and things that were beautifully made that came with the house, the dining room set, which no one, for example, would want today. It's all Jacobean carved, crazy looking stuff. Everyone wants restoration hardware, smooth and sleek. So my mom kept that, and it came with the house as well when
So
we
do you
took it.
have, you still have lots of those pieces?
Some of them, not
Yeah.
a lot. A few things have survived. My parents took 4 truckloads of trash out of the house, and that was fun being a kid watching this process of something being renovated
So
like that.
it really, I suppose, talks to your love of the adventure and the discovery. And that's what the attic was. It was like a jewel, a jewel chest to you of a world that you didn't know. It was
Yeah.
an insight into it. Okay. So then if we go back to the screen porch, which is now your favorite, probably because you know all the crap you've kept in your own attic.
That Alex is trying to get rid of as we speak, Adrian.
I understand. If you go back to the your own screen porch, which it's the family favorite, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
With that, what emotion does it evoke for you if you had to put it into one word to be in that space?
Oh, it's just for happiness is a tough word because what does that mean? But it's a feeling of happiness that you can you don't have to be doing anything there. You can just be sitting there looking out through the screen panels, the garden and the trees and the birds and be amused. Or you can bring a book out there and read and pay no attention except the sound that's going on of nature in the background. Or you can be out there with friends having a drink and gather around the couches out there and laughing and stuff like that, or just me and Alex, in the morning yakking over coffee before work begins. So it's just a great place to be. And there's only one overhead light, that's a very dim light that came from Morocco. So we often sit out there. We never turn the light on. We have candles out there in the summer, when it gets dark. It's a magical place for us in the middle of urbanity, despite nature being all around us. I drive 5 minutes and it's the hurly-burly of the borough of Queens, 2.5 million people, if this were a city, it'd be the fourth largest city in the United States, the one borough I live in of New York City, and the most diverse county in all of the United States in terms of ethnicity. That's a mile away. All of that is there. You know, every restaurant, every kind of food you want, a mile this way, a mile that way, you can have anything you want. But when you drive off the boulevard into this peninsula, even in the dead of summer when I've observed this, it could be 90 degrees out, and sometimes there's like a little cloud over the entry meaning just driving between the trees. There's no gate or anything.
Yeah.
You just feel it. You feel like a little decompression. You know, I live near the Long Island Expressway, which is madness at all hours. You know, it's a mile and a half away. So there's very busy stuff near us. LaGuardia Airport's 5 miles away. Planes are coming in, circling, whatever. We can see the Throgsneck Bridge, one of the major bridges into the mainland, into the city. So there's a lot of urbanity, and this is a retreat. It's always been a retreat. It's why my parents came here to begin with, and it's why I came back after living in, you know, New England and Texas and Connecticut. You know, I wanted to come back eventually, and eventually I did.
I can't wait to come and have a drink on the porch, man.
You're invited, Adrian. That's my question for you is when are you going to be in New York next?
I'm not sure, but it won't be that far away. But it'll be within the next 12 months, probably. Yeah, it sounds delightful. And, you know, this thing around tapping into the emotions of spaces and being able to, you know, that porch gives you, you know, your that sort of intimate connection as well with, you know, your wife, as well as it gives you the ability to have that intimate connection with your friends in that space. There's no pressure in the space. There's no need for too much. It's enough. No matter what it is, it's enough. And when I'm designing homes, I'm looking for those moments for my clients, if it's what they're looking for, is where do those exist and how do you create the magic? The thing that fascinates me, and I don't tell lots of people this, is the number of architects I ask this of, and the spaces outside of their house, not inside their house. You're a landscape architect, so I expect as much from you. But it really is intriguing, the number of people who they really decompress. They'll still be within the boundaries of their house, on the porch or whatever. They're not in some heavily curated space. And I think the simplicity of that makes a difference. They're very in touch with the weather, the breezes, the smells, you know, what's going on around outside. You talked about watching the birds come over. You talk about watching, you know, the osprey and the geese and these different pieces of it. And that's what makes it so magical. And every home deserves either a big or a small space that does this, creates magic in the hearts of their clients, you know.
I would say, Adrian, also that quite a few of my clients request a screen porch if they have the space for it. And, you know, the mosquitoes are ferocious in New York. That's part of the reason.
So that's why it's screened.
Yeah, at 6 o'clock, they come out in the evening and, you know, they're ready to carry you off. But it's also because it, you know, almost every house I do has a terrace of some kind, you know, because they're freestanding. But it's also a space that I think what you're alluding to and saying in part is that it's open to outdoors, but it's also protected. And one of the differences when you're on a screen porch, you can be out there in, you know, a beating down rainstorm as long as you back up a little and watch that. And that's like a kid pleasure from childhood of, you know, looking at the window, whatever it is, at the, you know, big thunderstorm, and you hear the thunder coming. You got a dose of it early in the day. You hear it coming, and then it happens, and you know, it just washes over you, and it's a little scary, but it's fun to be out there too. And I think that sense of, you know, minimal enclosure but deep connection makes places like screen porches special and engaging, and also, like you say, a place to, you know, let it go, let it wash over you and relax. It's about relaxing and not thinking about anything really.
But yeah, allowing it to just become simple.
Yeah.
Just, yeah. And back
Full
to
pleasure.
just, yeah, simple pleasures, back to the functional side of things. Sounds wonderful. I love the storyteller you are as well, because when you're telling me about things, my head is just pinging with pictures, and you've got a very, possibly from your training as well, but you've got a very eloquent way of capturing the story.
Oh,
And
well, thank you.
I imagine with your clients that it's very easy for them to get into the softness of the rhythm of your speech and your inquiring mind. And I would feel like that you are very present for them.
I try to be. I think, this may sound like a cliche, but you have to be curious about people to be successful at being an architect or a landscape architect or a designer.
Mm.
All the different kinds of designers that there are. You have to have a natural curiosity. And if you don't, you're going to miss out on a big part of what's so wonderful about the professions of design.
Thank
It's connecting on some level, even though, I'm not there to make friends with my clients and I have
you.
no expectation, but I love the feeling of when it's all done and they start living there. And there's certainly clients I have in the neighborhood that I see over and over again and get invited to parties and stuff like that. But even the ones that are far away, I used to do apartments in the city. To hear that, I bump into them or get a note from them saying, "We love our house. It's thank you so much." Just speak like two sentences. It's incredible to get that. It's just really, it makes everything you put into it worthwhile. I know you know the feeling and you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
It does, and it's just that little piece that just, as you say, makes it all worthwhile. It's one thing to do a set of drawings and all the rest. The other is to, as you say, not necessarily have them as your friends, but have the deep connection to understand them
Yeah.
and to understand the land that they're on and what
Right.
that can bring. Is, to me, that's the joy of the journey. That the actual drawing is my most passionate part, but the joy of the journey with the client is
Yeah.
the fun part. That's the
Yeah.
excitement, the discovery, the curiosity. How can this matter and why would this matter? And the nuances of human behavior is just so joy-filled, and then getting
I
to try and put that into some form is, yeah.
yeah. It's funny you say that about drawing because I love the drawing part too. Like sitting at my desk, sketching, going over the floor plan and, talking about an existing house and kind of reimagining how it could work. Sometimes with the most minimal changes,
Mhm.
you're trying to keep the integrity, but gently pull it into the 21st century without zapping out everything that, if you're lucky, was charming about it. Or on the other hand, getting rid of all the horrible renovations that ill-considered renovations that may have happened over a
Mhm.
century.
Mhm.
But I get lost in the drawing process where I can block out everything for an hour or two just problem solving. It's a real joy. You're correct.
It's, yeah, it beats everything, but the problem comes from the situation and the client's needs and all those. That's what creates the need to
Exactly.
do it. And then it's that, yeah, I get lost in the drawing. And to me, it's the greatest joy
Yeah.
to feel like you're I think real-time problem solving, like real-time problem solving and envisaging the outcomes for people and then being able to twist little pieces that make it just so much better with the simplest of
Yeah. Yeah.
pencil on paper. That to me is, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It's great. It's really
yeah.
a great feeling.
Kevin, absolutely wonderful to unearth all this stuff that I did no idea about you. And yeah, to just fall into that rhythm and comfort and joy of what you do and how you do it.
Well,
Mate,
thank you for having me,
so
Adrian. It
good.
was really fun talking to you, getting to know you in a different way.
Yeah,
And I sure as heck hope you're going to be in New York to sit on the porch back there.
I'm going to.
Soon.
Trust me, that's going to happen. That's going to happen for sure. Yeah, no, really looking forward to that. That would be really, really cool.
Great.
Kevin, go and have a wonderful afternoon and evening.
Thank you,
And
you too. And thanks again, Adrian. It was really fun.
cheers, buddy. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning into our conversation. I hope it left you both informed and inspired. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. And please don't hesitate to share your design thoughts with me. It's always a joy to hear from you. If you're like me and crave a deeper dive into design thinking, coupled with a love for travel and adventure, consider one of my architectural adventures. Join me and some of my wonderful design friends and embark on a journey of a lifetime. Apply for an unforgettable design experience at adrianramsey.com. With our clients spanning the globe, I firmly believe behind every great project are great people. If you're a great person and seeking to turn your dream into a reality, I'd be honored to design your home with you. Why not join the ranks of our exceptional clients and let's make your heart sing? Reach out to me at studio@ardesignhouse.com. That's studio@ardesignhouse.com, and let's get a conversation going and make your heart sing.